Hello and welcome to a live stream of some Docker Compose goodness. Today I was supposed to be doing a talk, or at least doing a video on a talk that I'm doing in the next couple of days for PHP Southwest. But today has just gone completely nuts, and I only finished work a few hours ago, and I haven't actually had a lot of time to put anything together in the last few days. So I thought, why not just do a live stream on something that I needed to do anyway, which is the Compose part, Docker Compose part, for the Docker in Motion course that I'm doing. The talk that I'm going to be doing in the next few days, I should say, is around putting your Docker images on a diet. So I've settled on a title. I've been building some bits and pieces for that. There's a Docker repository, Docker Hub for that. There's also a GitHub repository for that as well. I'll be talking about that and so much more closer to the time. But right now, I want to focus on the Docker Compose bits and pieces. And the reason why I'm doing a live stream is purely because I haven't had a chance to record today's normal web chat. So I do apologize if you were expecting that. This is why it's a little bit late in the day as well. Now, if you don't know, Docker Compose is a course that I'm doing for Manning Publications, and this course is goes into a lot of depth in terms of learning Docker from basically the ground up. And we create a web server as well as a database server in containers, and then we link them together. And also in the latter part of the course, we also do Docker Compose. And that is kind of where I'm at in terms of the script writing, and that's where I'm at in terms of like where the code is at the moment. And throughout these steps, what I've been doing on my Saturday show, which is Coffee and Code, I have been doing some live coding about around that. So I just thought we'll push it forward, and we'll do this time on YouTube rather than on Twitch. But I will be on Twitch tomorrow at my usual time, which is about between 10 and 11. It's probably closer to the 11 a.m. mark GMT. So if you want to watch me do some more code, and tomorrow we're going to be doing something slightly different, then do join me then. Today, though, Docker Compose. Let's get into it. I'm not going to talk too much about what I'm doing, because that's all the point of the course. I'm just going to build something just to get something to work. So it's not really a tutorial. It's more of just a demonstration of Docker Compose, and I'm going to use the bare minimum for this. So I'm going to go into the tutorial window, which is this one, and I'm going to quickly create just a new file, and we're going to call this docker-compose. I'm not sure if you can see this on the actual stream, but I'm basically just creating a file there, dockercompose.yaml, and I'm just going to give it a service. So actually, do a version first. We're going to set that to be 3, and we're also going to do services, because we're going to start these services up. And what we've got already, I should just demonstrate, is in here we've got Apache and we've got MySQL. We have the Docker file for Apache and the Docker file for MySQL. And what I would like to do is have this Docker Compose file literally just spinning this up. So we just have to run a simple Docker Compose up -d, and we spin up both of these containers from these images. And if we don't have these images built on the system, then they'll automatically be built. So we need 2 services. The 2 services are, if you haven't guessed already, the Apache and they are MySQL. Okay, so in here, we're going to specify a build, and that is going to be the path to the Docker file or the build context. So Apache, like so, and so we're in here. We want to go into Apache because that's where the Docker file is, and same with MySQL. So let's build that, MySQL. So I'm just going to blast through this really quickly. In the course, I'm going to talk about this in far more depth. So, I'm purposely skipping over, the theory of this. So after the build, we're also going to create a link. So that's links, and that's going to be an array going to MySQL. That's fine. We're also going to depend on it as well. So let's just depend on, and that's going to be an array as well, and that's going to be MySQL. MySQL, I believe, needs to have some environment variables, but I can't remember off the top of my head what they should be. I'm not going to bother with a network at this stage. I don't think. Maybe, I don't know. I tell you what, let's just see if we can get. Let's just remove. So I'm doing this as I'm sort of writing this code as I'm thinking. Let's just see if we can get Apache built. Let's just save that, and I'm going to go into the good old terminal window, which whoops, sorry, my the old computer went a little bit crazy then. So in here, we can now, if I did an ls, we should be, we've got Apache and MySQL. If we went up a level, that's where the Docker Compose file is. We actually need to move that into code. So, oops, move Docker Compose into code like so. Otherwise, it won't work. Let's go into code. There we go. So that should have now, been moved up into here. That's great. So I had that in the wrong directory. And we can just do, let's just see. Docker images. We shouldn't have any images, and that's great. So therefore we don't have any containers. So we could do Docker Compose, if I can spell that, up and -d, and that's going to obviously throw an error because something's wrong. It's invalid. It should be a string. Docker Compose or version. Okay, yeah, okay. I always get this wrong. There we go. So it needs to be what I did there. If I go back to the tutorial, is I actually just put that into quotes because it's supposed to be a string. Okay, so let's try that again. It hopefully will work. Nope. Service must be a mapping, not a non-type. Oh, this is what happens when you've had a very busy day and you're rushing through things. Because it's supposed to be YAML, you've got services, and then underneath that you've got the Apache and then the build. YAML is very sensitive with the structure. And what I had there is it was all on, like that. Whereas Apache is actually a service. So you have services up here, and then you have Apache, and then the build. So that's what I did wrong. So let's save that. Even though the even though this didn't really say much. I mean, it didn't. I mean, service must be a mapping, not a non-type. Well, what on earth is a non-type? But let's see if that runs. Okay, excellent. So we're building Apache. That's great. So basically what's happening here is that because I don't have the Docker image installed and I'm trying to attempt to do a Docker compose up -d, which essentially is a Docker run, it will build the image because I don't have the image itself. So I'm just going to allow this to run, and it's going to hopefully build. My machine is making some interesting noises, so hopefully it'll be okay. Excellent. So now I should have, if I did a Docker images, I should now have, yep, I've got that image. That's great. And if I did a Docker PS, we should also have, fantastic, we should also have the container, which is great. However, we won't be able to access this container because we're not actually publishing the port. We've got a port that's been exposed, port 80, but we're not publishing anything to it. So what we're going to need to do is go back into the old tutorial here, and we're going to need to expose some ports. So let's go onto here, ports, and that's also can be an array, so that's going to be 80 to 80, so that's just container to host. If I can come on, there we go. Gosh, it's been a heavy day. I've been doing all sorts of WordPress stuff today, so my mind is completely boggled in plugins and functions and all sorts of crazy spaghetti code of WordPress. So anyway, so that's the ports. That's cool, and I guess at this stage we can start working on the MySQL service. So let's do that now. So let's do MySQL, MySQL, and that is going to have a build. Oops. And that's going to go into the MySQL directory. I'm just going to bring that back to make it a little bit more in line. We're not going to do anything about the ports on this one, because what we're going to do eventually is link these two together. So that will now build the MySQL container, or it will build the MySQL image, I should say, and this has already been built, but it's going to update the ports, because what it'll do when I do a Docker Compose up-d is it will recreate this container. It knows the container's there, so what it'll do is recreate it, and it'll recreate it with new configuration, which is that. Bear with me just a mo. I'm just going to double check a couple of other bits and pieces whilst I'm here. That's all looking good. So yeah, okay. What I'm going to do, go back to the old terminal here. Let's click on that, and let's run another Docker Compose up, and that will say it's building MySQL. It's doing all the things, doing all the stuff. Hopefully, I can get this running quickly, because I want to go to bed, but also hopefully I don't have to keep installing this stuff, because it takes a long time, and I'm streaming. I shouldn't really be downloading all of this stuff at the same time. Okay, so now it's creating the containers, and it looks like that's done. I should mention that when it's creating the containers, it's actually assigning the names for the containers. So the name is the service, but this here is code. This denotes that this is from the parent folder. The parent folder being code, and then we're assigning one because you can have more than one container, off of the back of this. Okay, so that's been built. So if I did Docker images, we should now have another image. That's fantastic. And if we did Docker ps-a, we should get another container, which is fantastic. But notice that it's failed here. In the status here is exited, and I think this is because I haven't given it an environment variable that I need to. Best way to check that is to go to Docker logs and type in the name of the container that you want to get the logs files from, which is that. And yes, definitely. So it's saying you need to specify one of these three environment variables, which are all based around the MySQL root password. We're just going to copy that and go back into the code here, and if I can spell it right, 9 times out of 10, I can't. Environment. It's got 3 N's. 1, 2, 3. Okay, environment. And we're going to have an array, and we're just going to equal that to a string, and we're just going to set it to test. So that's going to create our test root password. So if we go save, and what I'm going to probably need to do is, instead of doing a Docker up, I'm just going to do a Docker build, because this is required in the build process. So we're going to do that, and there we go. So most of that was in the cache, which is great. So now let's do a Docker up again. So notice that the Apache 1 was already up to date. Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry, what I did there, because I got that wrong. What I did there is I ran Docker compose build rather than Docker compose up -d. That built the 2 images, and it did it in such a way that a lot of things were already in the cache, so it was very, very quick. And then what I did was a Docker compose up -d, because nothing had changed to this container, Apache 1, everything was up to date. It just skipped over it, and then it recreated the MySQL 1, hopefully now with that that password. So if I did Docker ps-a, yay, it's up. That's great. Which should mean that if I did Docker exec-it, and it's that container name, which is code_mysql_1. We went in as MySQL and gave it a user of root -p, put in the password of test, which I've just given it. We're now into MySQL, which is fantastic. This is moving in the right direction. If I typed in show, let's do databases, if I spell that right, databases, we should have all the basic databases that we need, which is fine. Now, if I came out of this and went into the container again, but this time as bash, oops, like that, and then did an ls, we should see that we have a schemas directory. That schemas directory has been added through the Docker file. Now, if if you don't know what's going on, I do suggest checking out the previous episodes of Coffee and Code, where I've talked about this in a little bit more depth. Basically, I'm copying a folder called schemas into this into the image during the Docker build, during the Docker file build process, and in here, it's if I did ls into schemas, we should have a rebuild.sql. And if I did a cat of that, so schemas and then rebuild, we should get, we've got a very basic set of commands, set of MySQL commands here. So we drop the database if it exists, Docker in motion, then we create it, then we use it, and then we drop the person table if it exists, then we create it, and then we insert some people. Which is great. So what I can do now is use this. So because I'm in Bash, I can do MySQL, or I could have done this in MySQL, I suppose. So MySQL -u root -p, and then what I'm going to do is stream that in. So schemas and then rebuild, and do those, put in the password, and then what I can do. I've done this really a roundabout way, to be honest, but MySQL -u root -p again. So I've just ran that rebuild. I've passed that rebuild.sql into MySQL. If I went in as test and then did show tables again, whoops, like so. Not show tables. What am I doing? Sorry, show databases. It was going so well. So now we have the newly created Docker in motion database. So if I was to use that, so Docker _in_motion, and then did a show tables again. This is what I wanted to do before. We now have the person table, and if I select all from person, we should see those 3 records that was inserted during the this SQL, the rebuild SQL. So that's fantastic. We've now got the MySQL database running in a container. We've just updated the schema and also inserted some records, which is fantastic. But a big but. If I went to exit this and exited out of the container, we still need to link these 2 services together. Excuse me. Now, before I think in the last episode or 2 of Coffee and Code, which is the Twitch live stream that I do every weekend on a Saturday, I demonstrated how to link them I shouldn't say indirectly, but using the Docker container IPs, because every container has its own IP. And I mentioned quite a lot in that stream that is a bad idea. I kept making the point clear that was a bad idea, because the IPs of a container will change as soon as the container changes, because containers are meant to be rebuilt and they're torn away and thrown away and started up, and therefore their IPs just are in total constant flux. You're not supposed to have a container that lasts for like a lifetime. You're supposed to deploy new things, new toys, new builds of your application on a regular basis, on a continual delivery approach. So you shouldn't ever see your containers as something that is a fixed point, because they're not. And so I was using the IP of the container, which is really bad, and I did make that point clear of why you shouldn't do that. But what we can do is we can use the service name, because the service name here won't change. We've got Apache and MySQL, and so what we can do is link the 2 together. I'm going to talk about this in so much more depth on the Docker in Motion course, but essentially it is like this. If I did that, links, and then we just put in the name of the container that we want to link to. So in this case, it's just MySQL. Excellent. And let's just save that. Now, let's run that again. So I'm going to go back into the terminal. And we're going to, let's just clear that down. Don't need that. I've lost my trail of thought. Let's do a docker compose up -d. So it's recreating Apache because it knows that there's a change. And it should now link it to MySQL. Hopefully this will work. Excuse me. Right, so that's been recreated, and if you notice, MySQL was already up to date, so that wasn't touched. So we should now be able to, if we did docker ps-a, we should, they're both up. We should be able to start looking at the actual output of this in the browser. So let's go to the browser, which is this one. I've already put in the IP address of the Docker machine that I'm using, so I'm just going to press enter. Now this is taking a little bit of time, so I'm wondering if there was an issue with, yes, there will be an issue, because in the actual code I'm obviously still referencing the IP, the old IP of the old container that I was probably using back in the last Coffee and Code stream. So that needs to change. So this is just going to fail and time out. which is fine. I think what I'm going to do here is just go back into the code, and I've got a feeling that in Apache config, in sites in config.php, yes. So the host here is the old IP address of the old container that I had probably about a week ago. But we can change that to be the name of the service that we're using. So we can do MySQL like that. Now, hopefully, that will solve our issue. Save that, and then what we need to do is rebuild this. We need to rebuild this Docker image, because what we're doing is we're copying the code into the image. I haven't got on to volumes yet, and I won't do in this live stream, but in the volumes section, what I'm going to be talking about is how we can mount how we can mount this code into via different ways into our Docker volumes, essentially. So let's just go back into let's just out of sheer curiosity, let's have a look back at, can you see that cannot connect to the database? There's an error, so it timed out. Okay, so what we've done, just to recap, just changed that to be the name of the host. That's fine. Let's go back into the browser, not the browser. Sorry. What do I need to do? Terminal. And I need to rebuild this, so I'm going to do a Docker just to make sure that it has rebuilt. Docker compose, and I'm just going to do build. Whoops. Wonderful. Okay, so that's being rebuilt. So now I can do a Docker up -d, which will recreate those containers. It knows that the code Apache 1 has changed, so that needs to be recreated, and that's done. MySQL hasn't changed, so that's not being touched. That's great. So with any luck now, if we go to the browser and refresh this page, boom, there we go. We have the application running through a very, very simple Docker compose file. I mean, check out this. Check out the compose file. The compose file is, 14 lines? And I've added spaces. So 14 lines of code. It's not even code. It's just like text. 14 lines of text, and you've got a web server and a database server running. You know, how good is Docker? That is how powerful it is. You know, you've done all the hard work. You've created the Docker files. You've got your application running. All you need to do is write 14 lines, and then you've got your application actually spun up on a server. That's pretty cool stuff. I'm glad that worked all in that sort of in that way, which was great. There wasn't too many issues, especially for an ad hoc live stream. I wasn't going to do this today. I was going to talk about other bits and pieces about the talk that I'm doing next week. So yeah, I'm pretty chuffed with that. I'm just going to demonstrate what this actually does, because you're probably thinking, you know, what is it that you've just created? So if I go back to the browser a minute, so this is the application that we have running when you work your way through the Docker in Motion course. And we have links to the GitHub repos, the DocHub repos for the web server and the database server, because obviously there's two images. The Docker in Motion forum as well. I should mention that there is a forum where you can ask questions to me and other people in the course who use the course, as well as a subscribe link to this channel. But the actual application itself is extremely simple, in the sense that it is just a list of people, and you can delete these people and you can add a person. So you can click on add, which takes you to this form, and you can just put in anything you want. So I'm just going to do test and test and say 34, and this is a test. And we're just going to hit save, and that should just create a new record here called this is a test, and we can delete that, and there you go, that gets removed. The whole point of this is to demonstrate that when you tear down the Docker containers, you're going to get rid of this data. That was why we needed to install or run the rebuild SQL file, because we were running from cold. It was running from cold. When I get onto the volumes, I'll be showing you how to actually store this data in Docker volumes, which means that your application will still run, or still be, the data will still be around, even if the Docker containers disappear. So you can quickly spin up those containers and still have access to the data. The Docker volumes is like the next step on from this. There's a lot more in terms of the Docker Compose stuff that I'm going to also talk about in the course as well. But I guess for anyone who doesn't really know about Docker in Motion, let me just talk about it a little bit more depth. So I'm just going to bring up. Excuse me, my cold is slowly going, but it's still lurking. So I've got a link in the description in the description of this video that links to the course, but the course is from Manning Publications, and we have we've got eight. I guess you could call them chapters of this course, and the course is like a presentation in the sense that it's very. I'll do a preview here. Hopefully this will run. Yep. So it's an animated presentation, which goes through a lot of theory in the first two modules, or the first two chapters. It compares things like containerization to virtualization. It talks about all the things that are challenges to web developers when they're creating lots of environments. So this is especially true for freelancers. And if I skip on a little bit, it tells you all the dangers of not partitioning, segregating your applications. So having bugs in one will probably mean that you've got bugs in other projects if you don't use things like Docker to help isolate your application. And then I talk about, this is the messy setup syndrome. Then after that, I talk about the benefits of using Docker, and after that one, we then go on to the differences of virtualization and containerization, like I've mentioned, as well as what you should put in a Docker container and what you shouldn't put in a Docker container. So the first two sections are quite theory-based, right? They're quite, excuse me, they're quite sort of like knowledge-based type stuff. So here I'm talking about the big confused container. I don't know if you saw there, is where you're basically using a container in the same sense as a virtual machine, which is wrong. Because you're just using that as a huge sort of storage area, if you will, for everything. I mean, that's the reason why I split out MySQL from the web server, right? Because that's the whole point. I also talk about microservices and what they are, and how you can use Docker to help build microservices. I also talk about how we can inject configuration into the containers, so a little bit like what we did just a minute ago with Docker Compose, so injecting stuff in. And then after that, if I went back a bit. In the later parts of the course, we then actually start getting into the nitty bitty, the gritty stuff. So Docker image management, so creating images and managing those, how to push those images up to the Docker Hub and repositories and stuff like that, how to pull them down, how to manage containers. So there's a huge raft of bits and pieces. So how to manage containers, how to create containers, and we're building this this application, this person application, whilst we're doing this. So you can see this as like a project that we're building. And then after that, we talk about storage. So once we've got the database containers running, we then talk about storage. And then after that, if I bring that up a bit, we talk about, let me bring that up so it's in shot, Docker Compose. So this is kind of where I've been, this is the first part of it. What I was doing tonight was Docker Compose. And I say first part of it, and that is because this is in what's called MEEP, which is Manning's Early Access Program, which means that you can get it now. You can get the course now, and then when new bits come along, you'll get those before anyone else, before it officially goes public. Excuse me. And you're able to access the forum and suggest things in the course as well. So if there's something that I haven't explained very well, then you can talk that through in the forum. And believe you me, there is no coughing whatsoever in this course. The amount of editing that I've had to do to make myself sound like I haven't got a cold is unbelievable. But yeah, this is Docker in Motion. I'm going to put there is a link in the description below. If you fancy learning Docker, then do check that out. But I'm going to shoot off and get some kit, because tomorrow we're going to do a live stream on Twitch. So that's going to probably be closer to 11 a.m. GMT. And I won't say what we're playing with in that live stream, but it's going to be interesting. So if I don't see you then I'll see you in the next tutorial, which is on Tuesday, as well as the Friday show, which is the usual web chat, which will replace today. But if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe, like, share, and all of those kind of things. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you again next time. Cheers. Bye.